Welcome to Future Talk. On today's program, we're going to talk about a recent TED Women's Conference in Palo Alto that was part of the TED movement. TED is spelled T-E-D, and it's a global virtual movement devoted to what it calls ideas worth spreading. It hosts an ongoing series of TED Talks, which can either be in person or online. There are many local chapters of TED called TEDx. For example, there's a TEDx Bay Area, which organized the recent TED Women Conference. I have two guests who were involved in that conference. Francine Gordon is CEO of the F. Gordon Group, which works with global companies on issues such as innovation, leadership, and the advancement of women. She's a co-organizer of the TEDx Bay Area Women's Program, has a PhD from Yale, and was one of the first two women on the faculty of the Graduate Business School at Stanford University. She's held senior management roles at several high-tech firms and is currently writing a book on gender and innovation. Tatyana Kanzaveli is the chief organizer of TEDx Bay Area, which hosted the recent TED Women Conference. She's held executive roles in a number of startups and large internationals. She was an early adopter of social media and social networking channels, using them to build successful online and face-to-face communities. She also runs a social customer relationship management consultancy, a Bay Area executives meetup group, global social CRM roundtables, and is a frequent speaker at conferences. We'll be getting to our guests in just a few minutes, but first we have a pre-taped interview with one of the speakers at the conference, California Secretary of State, Debra Bowen. Let's go ahead and roll that tape. Debra, what's on your agenda in your upcoming term as Secretary of State?
Well, I ran for the first time for two reasons, Florida and Ohio. There was such a controversy about whether our votes were being counted accurately and the integrity of our voting system that we had to put that in order. So we have done that in California. I'm pleased to reassure Californians that their votes will be counted exactly as they were cast. And now I will continue to work on getting every eligible Californian registered to vote, and then getting everybody a convenient way to vote. My particular focus has been on young people, and getting young people not just registered but engaged. The rate of voting is increasing much more rapidly in the under 30 voters than in any other age group. So it's actually become cool to vote again.
I know that you're also very concerned about women's issues, and you're one of the relative handful of women who have been elected to statewide office in California. Do you have any special approach toward bringing women more into the political process as opposed to the population in general?
Well, of course, I want to see every group registered, participating, and women historically have not run for and been elected to office in the same numbers. There is some very interesting academic work. One of the things about it is that women are much more self-critical than men. So they spend a lot of time thinking, well, am I qualified to run for this or that office? And by the time they decide, their male candidates have $500,000 in the bank.
Now, some people have said, in fact, a lot of people have said, that money tends to skew democracy because it costs so much money to run that most people can't get over that hurdle. People who are otherwise qualified can't make the race.
No question that money plays a large role in politics, and a larger role than I would like to see it play. But we do have a system of disclosure and reporting, and my website, which is sos.ca.gov, provides information about where money is coming from for both candidates and for ballot initiatives. And for ballot initiatives, I have seen that information be one of the most significant factors that voters use in formulating an initial opinion. Who is funding this? If it's an issue that relates to pollution and they see that it's funded by oil companies, they're going to react differently than if they see that it's funded by environmental groups.
You were involved in a group called TEDwomen, or at least you gave a talk there earlier today. What can you tell us about that group?
Well, this is, I think, the first time that TED has brought this kind of program to the Bay Area. And the idea is a series of relatively short talks that are intended to spark the imagination and that span the subject matter. It's not all politics. It included, just a huge variety of issues. And we had some arts included as well. It really is intended to be not kind of just a gripe session about, oh, there aren't enough women and it would be better if there were more, but an inspiration and a look at things that are going well, changes that are happening. And I was really inspired. I spent the whole day listening to other people's talks.
That was California Secretary of State Debra Bowen. Francine, it must have been a pretty good women's conference if the highest-ranking female state official in California spent the entire day there. What do you feel really came out of the conference?
It was thrilled that she spent the whole day. We thought she would speak and leave. And in her talk that you just heard, Debra mentioned the fact that she found it inspirational. And a big part of what came out of it was people feeling nourished in terms of knowing that there's a future for what can be done, feeling excited about the possibilities, and starting a lot of dialogue among the people who were there.
I think we have a graphic that shows the title page of the program. Maybe we could see that graphic. I think we have it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have a brochure with me, so I can show you.
So anyway, TED is all about ideas. So what were some of the ideas that came out of the conference?
A lot of the speakers talked about their own stories and how they had, in some cases, overcome very difficult circumstances, and in other situations talking about what inspired them to do what they've done, to give examples of how you can follow your passion and make a difference in the world. We had a couple of people who talked about things that they're doing in third world countries, in one case to end poverty by building devices to help people in Africa and other third world areas, for example, to help the women carry water or be able to have enough wood to get through the night in terms of Darfur. And the woman who talked about that talked about how she had been encouraged to do it, that she came to that conclusion because she had grown up on an Indian reservation, and how she had been inspired by the engineers, which...
Now, is this largely about building community, networking, creating ties between women to help each other advance?
It was about creating, encouraging women to speak up and to follow what they want to do, to understand that sometimes our biggest barriers are ourselves, and to say, go do it. That because if you have something you believe in, you have something that you feel passionate about, don't be held back by the I shouldn't, I couldn't, I can't. And time and again they were hearing examples of women in science, education, even in the food industry, overcoming the odds and going forward.
So a little consciousness raising and confidence building?
Yes,
things like that.
And the community. We allowed plenty of time for people to talk, make connections, and explore what the various speakers meant to them.
Now, what role do men play in this? I know there were some male speakers at the event. Were there male attendees as well? What did the men contribute?
There are, actually we had hoped to have more male attendees. We had some, not as many as we would have liked.
How many people attended the entire event?
Actually, we had over 400 people who wanted to attend. We actually had space for 170, and most of those people showed up. So it was a pretty mixed group.
Did you have a virtual presence? Could people follow it on the internet?
We did. We had the live audience, and then it was live streamed, so people were able to both watch it real time on their computers if they chose to, as well as there was a lot of tweeting going on throughout. And we had a very active group of people in the background who were tweeting the messages of what had been conveyed during the conference.
Now, is this about addressing a problem like there's something wrong with women's place in society now and we have to change it somehow?
It's less about that. I mean, this was not a conference about what's wrong and let's all complain and say things are terrible. It was really about what can be done when you set your mind to it, and understanding that, and many of the women talked who were in the conference, how they were scared of things or felt barriers or felt that they had to overcome odds, but they did it. And when they put their minds to it, when they put their passion to it and their energy, they made it happen.
Do you think that in order to accommodate women in the marketplace more, men have to change the way they behave?
I don't know if it's a question of how men behave. It's more a question of understanding that there are language differences. One of the speakers, Myra Strober, talked about habit of mind and interdisciplinary conversations, and she pointed out that when you talk about bringing women into the management environment, to a business environment, women sometimes communicate differently, not better, not worse. And so it helps, just like you go to another country and you learn a little bit about the culture there, to learn a little bit about the differences in how men and women communicate. So really it's more about that and not about changing behavior.
So you mean men and women speak different languages and they have to have a unified language that they can both understand?
They just have to understand that they have different languages and appreciate that in each other.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to move on to the next segment of the program right now. And we have another pre-taped interview with one of the conference speakers, John Hagel. And John Hagel works at the big management consulting firm of Deloitte, where he's director of the Center for the Edge, which researches emerging business opportunities. So let's go ahead and roll that tape. Now you're involved with TEDwomen, and I know that your work has something to do with increasing opportunities for women. How does that work out at Center for the Edge?
Well, it's a byproduct of some of the work we've been doing around trying to understand the longer-term changes that are occurring in the business landscape. One of the things that we did recently was just try to ask the most basic question of how are companies doing? Not just this quarter, not just this year, but over a long period of time. And what we found when we looked at all public companies in the United States since 1965, if you look at it in terms of return on assets as a measure of financial performance, return on assets has collapsed over that time period. It's now 75% lower than it was in 1965. What we're finding is the model of business that we had in the 20th century, which was really what we would call focused on knowledge stocks. In other words, the key to building a company was you had to develop some proprietary knowledge. You had to protect that knowledge, make sure nobody else could get access to it, and then you had to efficiently extract the knowledge and deliver it to the marketplace, the value from that knowledge.
Now, where do women figure in all of this? Because I know your work centers on women a lot.
Yeah.
Are there some business models that are more amenable to women than others?
Well, it gets to this notion of knowledge flows, and one of the things we've discovered as we've gone into this is that the knowledge that's most valuable actually is not data that kind of flows through the internet. It's what we call tacit knowledge, knowledge that we each have in our heads that are a result of recent experience that we haven't even processed ourselves. We have a very hard time expressing it to ourselves, much less expressing it to somebody else. That knowledge doesn't flow unless there are trust-based relationships. And the process of building trust-based relationships involves things like expressing vulnerability.
That was John Hagel, director of the Center for the Edge at the big consulting firm of Deloitte. Tatyana, John Hagel spoke about the need for expressing vulnerability as a good business strategy. Do you think that's the direction business is heading in today?
With everything that's happening in today's economy, with the changes, with all the social media channels playing the increasing role in how people communicate and how brands and companies communicate with people, we realize that people trust people. People don't trust brands.
So personal relationships have to be at the core of business?
And if you look at the nature of how people trust people, I wouldn't trust you if I don't know you, right? So I want to know what Marty likes to eat for breakfast.
And if you don't know me, you might not trust me either, but that's another story. We won't go into that.
But the thing is, I would feel much more comfortable dealing with you if I know a little bit more. Do you have a dog? If your kid got sick, or where you went on vacation. I don't want to know every single move you're doing during the day, but I really want to know a little bit more about what you read, what you care about, and then this will allow me to build more trusted business relationships.
Now, doesn't all the social networking where everything is done on the internet make that harder because you have relationships with people you've never even met in person?
And that's a challenge because some people can misrepresent on who they are and what they do. But at the same time, I can give you personal example. I met amazing people and built strong relationships that went from virtual world into the real one. Like yesterday, we had this big conference on innovation, and one of the speakers on the panel was CTO of HP, Susie Wee. I met her on Twitter. We built that relationship, and I realized how amazing person she is, not just as technologist, being a CTO, women CTO at HP, but also I know she plays hockey, and she went to Hawaii to her parents' anniversary, and I know so much, and we had such a nice dialogue over Twitter before we actually met and built business relationship.
So social networking is playing an increasingly important role. And I understand that as a result of the conference, a lot of people sent Twitter messages giving their feedback. In fact, I think we have a couple of Twitter messages that we're going to flash up on the screen. How would you characterize the volume of feedback or the quality of that feedback?
We were able to track just one hashtag, and it was easy. People have used different hashtags if you know Twitter terminology. But even based on what we've seen with hashtag TEDx BAW, there were over almost 2,000 tweets that we traced without even retweets. So that generated a lot of feedback on some ideas, on some talks. And guess what? People who use the same hashtag, they kind of formed a community. Mm-hmm. And that was our goal. A, to inspire people. B, to connect them.
So is this conference going to be an ongoing thing? Are you going to have another one?
Absolutely. The demand was amazing. When I just initially mentioned on Twitter that I'm planning on producing this event, and I just set up a simple online form just to gauge the demand. Within a day, without having an agenda or anything else, I had within a day over 100 people signing up. So that told me, based on like sample marketing research, that there is a huge demand for this type of events. Now we definitely...
Now is this mostly about networking to advance people in the technology sector? Because we are in Silicon Valley. Most of these people have roots in the technology field. Is there the idea of technology and innovation? Was that an important part of the whole conference?
I would say, short answer, no. Because I'm a woman, I'm a woman technologist, came from technology, strong technology background. But my idea was to show the diversity of women, diversity in what they do, in age, in specialties, in everything. So we had amazing cook who was on Iron Chef, and we had a student from Stanford University, and we had an educator. And I think that when you bring women, not just in technology, but in different fields with the startups, and they talk about what they do within the field they've chosen to be in, it inspires and triggers cross-functional inspiration among a variety of different women. Because there was a strong perception, if you're in a valley, you're women, you're in technology, and that has been highlighted in many different ways. And I wanted, and we all as a team wanted to show that you can be a cook and inspire people and be passionate about what you do. And if you're passionate about what you do, no matter who you are, you can inspire others.
Okay, very good. We need to move along to the next segment of our program. We have one more pre-taped interview, and this one is with Vivek Wadhwa, who is a senior research associate at the Labor and Work-Life program at Harvard Law School. So let's go ahead and roll that tape.
What I was talking about today at the TED conference was the issue of gender. What really surprised me when I started looking at the data was that only 3% of the founders of tech companies, tech is a broad field, it's more than what we hear about in Silicon Valley. 3% of the founders of tech companies, 1% of the founders of high-tech companies, as in what you have in Silicon Valley, are women. And we looked at the difference between male entrepreneurs and female entrepreneurs, looked into the backgrounds, we looked into the success rates of women-founded companies. And by every measure, women are ahead of men. That when they start companies, they're more conservative in spending money, therefore they're more successful. Companies with women board members tend to be a lot better managed. I mean, every parameter we looked at showed that women-run companies are more likely to succeed than men, dominated companies. However, the funding primarily goes to males over here because the perception is that you got to be a young, brash male to be a successful entrepreneur. False.
Now, you've said that there aren't too many women in the top ranks of entrepreneurs. Are you saying that this is a problem that needs to be fixed, or is this just something natural and we should let the market sort it out?
Marty, the problem starts with childhood. The problem starts with mom and dad. That they believe that that their girls should have Barbie dolls. The sons, they'll buy them guns, and they believe that their sons are macho and should enter math and science. The girls should go into marketing or interior design, God knows what else. For instance, my view is, with children is always let them be what they want to be. Don't pigeonhole them, don't stereotype them, don't try to position them in one or the other. But parents themselves have to have this image that their girls can be as successful as their boys can. And their girls can also start multi-billion-dollar companies. There's no reason why you can't have women CEOs starting the next Facebook or the next Google.
Now, is the reason they're not doing it because when a woman goes to a venture capitalist, he doesn't take her seriously because she's a woman?
Well, I've spoken to several dozen women over the last year or so, ever since I've been writing about this topic, ever since I've been researching it. And privately, they tell you the horror stories. They get in front of venture capitalists, and the VC will ask them, well, how does your husband feel about it? What's going to happen when you have children? I mean, just this type of questions that they're subjected, the way they're looked at.
Do you think there might be an issue in that being stubborn, being aggressive, being pushy is considered a desirable attribute in a man, but not so attractive in a woman?
Well, when a woman does that, she's called a bitch. She's called worse. I mean, when a guy does that, he's called macho. And that's what the problem is. I mean, we systematically discriminate against women.
That was Vivek Wadhwa of the Labor and Work-Life program at Harvard Law School. Now, he spoke about discrimination against women at the venture capital level. Do either of you feel that this really is like a serious problem, like there is intentional discrimination at that level?
I don't think it's intentional. It's more a question of what has the typical successful technology entrepreneur looked like, and you tend to associate that with somebody who's going to be successful again. I mean, there's research that has shown time and again that both men and women tend to make, for example, attribute to men more likelihood of success, et cetera. So it's not a conscious thing. I really think it's just something people don't even realize. But it's not a surprise that firms that have more women VC partners tend to make more investments in women.
Do you think that, Tatyana, maybe there's a difference between men and women as far as willingness to take risks?
I would say that there is no difference. I think it's more personality types versus males versus
temperamental
females.
Difference, like a woman might be more sensitive.
I think that's a
if
perception.
someone,
I think that's a perception, and that's one of the things that impacts the investments and everything else what women do. I would say that going back to Francine's comments and your first question, I think what makes it somewhat difficult for women to compete with men in the workforce or VCs or with the startups is the lifestyle, right? And the requirements that come with it. Mm-hmm. So if you're an entrepreneur, it's expected you work 24/7. At the same time, we know that based on our upbringing or society view on women, you're expected to do more house chores and house stuff than men do. And then you get questioned, well, where do you stand? Can you balance? Is lifestyle allows women to participate in certain functions?
Well, when he said that venture capitalists often ask women, what does your husband think? What about when you have children? So they basically questioning the woman's commitment, like is your family ultimately more important to you than your career? And if it is, then we don't we don't want to put our money behind you.
And right, and that's the same, not just for the startups, but in general, because of lifestyle expectations. So if you want to be high-ranking officials, it's expected that you are on call, live, on doing business 24/7 times 365. So that becomes more an issue when they try to decide who to promote, or even women making decisions, do I want to take that job, thinking, okay, how it will impact the family. And the assumption is that men can push family and everything else back, and women will have a hard time doing that.
Well, is that a true assumption? I mean, women have always taken greater responsibility for child rearing. Is there any reason to think that's going to change?
I think ultimately it's going to have to change simply because we're finding more and more that employees want to have work-life balance, men and women. Whenever there are companies that offer the ability to have more flexibility, you find that men are more likely to take advantage of it than the women, because there are more men at the companies than the women. But that given the opportunity, men actually would like to spend some time with their families too. And I think we're seeing more ability for men to say, hey, I want work-life balance too. I don't want to spend 24/7, 365 at the office.
Right.
And what makes a good innovator? Usually there's only a handful of women of any sex that do a lot of innovating. We're almost running out of time. We only have 1 minute left, so this will have to be really short. But you don't see too many women among the ranks of people who blaze a new trail. It's one thing to follow a trail that somebody else has blazed, but is there anything that makes women less likely to blaze a brand new trail where nobody has ever gone?
I don't think so, and I think part of it is women are not quite as good at publicizing when they do blaze new trails. I think that's the issue, not that they're not doing it.
It may be knowing that VCs will most likely fund male-run companies. They will delegate what they came up with to someone else to actually present.
Well, I'd love to talk more, but we are just about out of time, so we are going to have to wrap. I'd like to thank my two very distinguished guests, Francine Gordon and Tatyana Kanzaveli.
Thank you.
Thank you both for being here. Thank you for watching. Visit our website at www.futuretalk.net. For Future Talk, I'm Marty Wasserman.